Welcome Wargamers, Doug here from 2 Plus Tough, and I have a very different kind of video for you today. Right before I went to Holy Havoc, again that's why my voice is so strange if it sounds different, I lost it at Holy Havoc. Right before then, I got contacted by some great people over at Modiphius, and those are the guys who make the Elder Scrolls Call to Arms, the miniature skirmish game. And so I was very excited to start working with them. I was going to start doing battle reports and cool things on the channel here for Call to Arms. And just randomly, they asked me if I wanted to partake in a demo of their new adventure game. Now, this has been all over social media and stuff like that. It is a massive thing that has blown up on Gamefound, which is a crowdfunding site for game development and things like that. And so I got a chance to sit down with one of their leads of marketing and then also one of the actual game developers themselves and just sit down and play the first chapter of the Elder Scrolls Skyrim adventure game, and I wanted to talk about it today. Essentially what I'm going to do in this video is talk about how it functions, how equipment works, what kind of game it is, and then really just try to talk about the mechanics enough and the setting enough to really be able to answer the question, is this game for you? It's not going to be for everybody, but I do think there is a huge niche of people that really love these kinds of games, and I think that you might be one of them. So as a more formal, I guess, introduction to what the game actually is, Skyrim, the adventure game, is a cooperative, or a largely cooperative, board game. You do have miniatures, but it's not really like a miniature war game at all. You have a huge map of Skyrim as we know it in the video game, where you can explore dungeons and mountains and caverns and Daedric shrines and all these kinds of crazy awesome things. You play as a member of the Blades, which, if you're familiar with Skyrim lore, I'm going to go into it a little bit here for those of you who are not. When you play the video game Skyrim, the Blades are almost all but extinguished. There's like 2 or 3 left in the entire game, possibly a third sitting at a bar in the middle of nowhere. Well, this game, the adventure board game, is actually set 25 years before the events of the video game, before the Dragonborn really comes about, where there are more Blades around. Essentially, the Thalmor Embassy, which is the high elves that kind of rule everything in the video game Skyrim, are still making their way north to that particular continent. And so, basically all the Blades, the Emperor's Guard and Dragon Slayers, and all these things flee up to Skyrim to kind of try to hide and assimilate and kind of hide in plain sight amongst the other citizens of Skyrim against the Thalmor. Well, you play as one of these Blades. You can pick from a myriad of different races. All the different races have different skill bonuses. For example, in my playthrough, I played the Khajiit because I am a cat person, but because I also like stealth and sneakiness, and they start with their claw attacks rather than fists, which is a pretty cool thing. And so you start the game, as is tradition, all in prison. So you've all been picked up for minor crimes. The tendrils of the Thalmor are coming into Skyrim, and so they're trying to immediately lock down any and all Blades that they can find, because that entire military arm has been extinguished with the Thalmor conquering large swaths of the Empire. And it's interesting, so you start imprisoned, and obviously you will then break out, but that first little section, when you're first breaking out of jail and kind of getting used to the world that you're playing in, that really is the game's tutorial. You start in your, rough spin tunic, and you have no weapons, and you start accruing those things as you go. So it kind of starts real slow, but honestly by turn 3 or so, we were in the thick of it, which is fantastic, I guess, timing in terms of gameplay. Like, you start off, you understand that you need to make some decisions and go to a certain place. That's about it, but then again, by turn 3, you're rocking and rolling. Right off the bat, there's a ton of things to talk about, because what we're looking at is a game company take an open world video game and convert it into a tabletop experience. But I think it does an exceptionally good job. So I'm going to list off a bunch of mechanics, and it's going to sound like a lot. Like, it's going to sound as if this game is just overwhelming with rules and options and all these kinds of things. But the truth is, once we played it, and I will be throwing the footage of us just hanging out and playing it up here at some point. Once you just play it, like by turn 3, I totally understood what was going on. There's an event card, something happens in the world, each of us get our turns, we pick up armor, we do whatever we want to do. Now, one of the cool things about this story, and like I said, we're going to transfer over to the shared screen and talk about mechanics, but one of the things I love about it is that it's split into chapters. Essentially, my understanding is right now there are, I think, 6 chapters to the game, and there's different overarching quests, which would be a whole different set of chapters for expansions and things like that. But as far as the core game goes, they basically broke the story into 6 segments. And so I only played the first one, so I have no spoilers to give when it comes to the story whatsoever. That's a good thing, honestly, because I'm excited to try it myself. But what's cool about this thing is the idea of consequences, and we're going to hit that note really, really hard at the end of this video, talking about will it ever get stale? Because you can actually fail a number of your chapters, so to speak. A chapter is sort of like your overarching main quest for that round. You know, figure out who wanted you in prison. Go to X and like examine this, you know, mural that tells you all the details and that kind of stuff. So whatever your main quest goal is, in that you can also have a whole bunch of side quests that are really, really interesting. Again, we'll get to that. But you can actually fail your main quest and still win the game. So that's an interesting concept. There are consequences to failing, and because of those consequences, no two game playthroughs are ever going to be the same. If you fail it chapter 1, those consequences will catch up to you in the late game. As I said, in addition to your main quest, there's a whole bunch of side quests with NPCs that you can interact with. It's very cool because a lot of the NPCs are characters that we know from Skyrim, but you see them 25 years younger. So a lot of the older guys, when they're like, you know, talking about how they used to be a warrior of renown back in the day, you meet them and they're just like a little punk or something like that. It's so cool. But the reason that side quests are important is the game truly rewards you for interacting with the world. Without going into hyper detail about how the threat system works, essentially you have a main quest, and then the more side quests that you take, the more time you get to fulfill your main quest. So it's essentially rewarding you for going out and interacting with the world and exploring and dungeon diving and all these kinds of things. Now, of course, I chose, as I said, to be a Khajiit because I like sneakiness and because I have wares if you have coin. By the end of chapter 1, I went from being in absolute rags with nothing but my fur claws to scratch people with to a set of awesome armor. I had twin blades. I was sneaking up and like murdering people left and right. But again, there were consequences for my decisions, and I'll talk about those later. So what we're going to do now is go to the shared screen. We're going to chat about some basics, and then we're going to go on from there. Okay, and we will start here by just taking an overall look at the world itself. Of course, if you have played Skyrim, this is all going to look very familiar to you. These holds have been around for forever, dang near, and so the map itself has not changed radically. We do see that within each hold. You can see here's Falkreath, which is my favorite hold of the game. Here's the main city itself. They also have a cave, a couple of ruins. This is like a forest woodland thing. And pretty much those same things are kind of mapped out across everywhere. Every hold has some, you know, almost every type of biome in it in terms of dungeons, that kind of stuff. Some of them have more of one than another, like for example, mines or Dwemer ruins, that kind of stuff. But you get the idea. This is a pretty basic map. Now, at the start of every single turn, there's going to be a set of events right here on the bottom right. And so we'll just take this one and I'll show it to you here in a moment. And so here we have our first quest. This is sort of the equivalent of NPCs walking around and being like, I heard they're reforming the Dawn Guard or something like that, where it's just these little throwaway lines that lead you to a quest. And so that's essentially what's going on here with the event map, as I would describe it to people. And so just to kind of give you a sense, this is a world quest, meaning you can be anywhere in the world and receive it. And it's going to have you go to Riften, okay? Now, once this card is played, you have to deal with, this is called your threat level. So there's 2 threat here. You, as a player, can, it's kind of like the chaos management aspect of this game. Threat can be spread across your characters. It can be spread across holds. It's just kind of making sure there's some impetus to keep going. If you accrue too much threat, you'll start losing opportunities. It means you're taking on too many quests and you're not helping the world, or you're failing too many quests and that kind of stuff. So again, it's part of the consequence system. That's kind of its own jam. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how that works, but essentially, let's say you put the threat out there and your character, who, let's go over here. So we got our Khajiit, and we're going to throw him, let's say he's here. Let's say he just finished clearing a dungeon, right? And that world card comes up. Well, when it's my turn to activate, you can move up to 4 spaces. And a space is defined as any kind of link between 2 locations. So if we look at this example here, This, from that Dwemer Ruin right here over to Riften, would be 1 space. If I went here, that would be 2. This is a unique one with a fork, so you can choose. So we'll go 3, 4, you get the idea. But let's say we end in Riften. All right, here we are in the great city of crime. And now we're going to look back at our card and say, what happens if we get to Riften? Hoard resources. You can either take a speech check, and it tells you the results. We'll go into that in a second. Okay, so I got some dice here, and if we look at our card, it's going to have us roll 3 dice plus our speech skill. If you have the speech skill on your character, we'll talk about that later, what that means. You can add a dice for each point of speech that you have. Now we're looking for 3 results of this dragon star looking thing. If you push, it means essentially you can give up a reward or a treasure that you have in exchange for another die, basically. So we're going to take our 3 dice. This is how almost all skill checks work in this game, okay? So 3 dice plus any relevant skills. It tells you what side of the die you're looking for. In this case, we had 1. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. We had 1 success with this guy here. And then we could push, which is, of course, the idea is you're trying to hoard equipment and resources, so you can give them treasure to have successes, basically. So let's say I had 2 items, I give it to them, that would count as this was a natural, and then if I gave them 2 more items, it would be 2 additional of these like shapes so that you can succeed in the quest. If you don't, degrade Riften, which we'll get to that, and another stronghold, and destroy this card. Okay, so if we fail, we're going to destroy the card, throw that out of there, and then we go up here to our holds. Now, this is interesting because it is functionally the same as when war comes to a city, they close up a bit. So something that the Thieves Guild knew was coming happened, and they weren't prepared because we did not give them enough stuff. So let's do this. So we have to degrade Riften. So what we'll do is we'll cover up one of these. Boop. And it said degrade one other one. So I never liked Windhelm, to be honest with you. Let's go with that. And so what that means, if you look here, if there's 1 threat covered, so like in Riften and Windhelm, the market is inaccessible, so that in between quests, we can't come here and sell goods. If it's closed, it means you have to pay to be able to access it, which is huge at all, because even if you don't go to the market within a place, there's still quests and NPCs that you can interact with within those holds. So being completely shut out is a big deal. And then rioting is adding 1 threat every turn, which just means this place is in absolute disarray, and it's becoming a huge issue for the entire region, not just that hold. So that was a pretty bummer one, but let's redo that same thing here. And we're gonna, just for the purposes of explaining how the game works, fudge our numbers a little bit. Let's say between the 3 dice and our speech skill, we succeeded, okay? We would gain 2 experience. That's what that little star circle symbol is. You gain 2 experience, and you gain 8 gold. So we would go to our character card. I'm just going to use the one right below here to make it really easy for myself. You'd gain 2 experience, which will put the tokens there, and then 8 gold down here. And here's how you can keep track of things. I went ahead and moved my Khajiit card around to make it a little more accessible for me for this particular video. Now, this is a great point to talk about skills and stuff like that. You see, I've gained 2 experience. Once I reach 7, I will have achieved a level. When you reach this point, you're going to look up here at the top of the board, and here we have a whole bunch of skills, which is kind of, to me, like the crux of any kind of Elder Scrolls game, because you want your characters to be leveling up and getting cool things. So whenever you see situations or cards that tell you it's 3 dice for a dice check, plus, and then a skill name, for each bit of these that you have, you can add a die. So, for example, let's do speech. We're a sneaky dude. Actually, you know what? Yeah, let's do speech, just because we saw that one already. And there we go. Once we've accrued 7, we go ahead and we get rid of those because they don't overflow. Once you hit a level, you have to restart. And so now when we hit 8, we can pick a different skill and go here. And you just kind of keep building up skills that way. Again, you're starting from 0 after every time you reach a skill. But what's cool is that once you fill all of these bars up, you then have the ability to go legendary, which is to say now you get 2 speech for basically having this one skill. So it really does reward you for spreading out your skills, being very diversified. Like if I had speech here and speech here under 8, yeah, I could do that. Absolutely, if you wanted to, as far as I know, rules wise. But like, my goodness, you're in a rough place because you're not branching out and trying different skills. You're just hyper good at one thing. And so that is a very interesting concept for leveling up your character. There's no big dramatic, level up moment. You're just accruing skills over time, which I like quite a bit. So, okay, let's say between our speech skill and our 3 dice, we succeeded at this test. Shuffle 144 with the top 4 cards of the event deck and destroy this card. So this is where things get very, very interesting. You see that shuffle 144. We're going to look over here, and you are going to see some cool stuff. Essentially, the way that their game functions is almost like a choose-your-own-adventure type thing. The choices are the pass-fail parts of this, and some of them don't require tests. Some of them are just like you just choose to do one or the other. There's no immediate consequences, but it does have stuff later on. So what we're going to do is go up here, and boom, it pulls out this card for us, which, let's take a look here. Active event, gain 1 more coin whenever an item is sold. So we're going to put that into our event deck as it said. Event deck's right here. And then we would shuffle it up and that kind of stuff. I'm not going to worry about it right now for the sake of, brevity or whatever like that. But this is essentially, we succeeded, and so now we have a positive consequence going forward. When that gets drawn for that round, everyone, if they're near a town, can sell stuff and make more money. That's the power of speech. Down here, we have the turn sequence, which of course just kind of walks you through every single turn. I love these things because they make it very, very simple as to when things happen. I love that so much. So you can very quickly just walk through a turn here. I'm going to leave it up here for a second. Strongholds. When arriving at a stronghold, a player can do the following in any order. You can take an action. You can complete a quest, explore a stronghold. We completed a quest by showing up in Riften. You can upgrade and enchant items. You can sell stuff, buy them, craft items, buy a horse if you want to. I believe that just kind of increases the range at which you can move on a given turn. And so below that are basically your constant actions, which are you can go places, you can explore things, you can, try to encounter a roaming monster. This thing does have roaming beasts around. Like when you are moving throughout Skyrim, there are certain event cards that are going to be like summon a vampire, and it'll give you a specific place, like summon a vampire in a forest in Whiterun. Okay, well here's a forest in Whiterun. There we go. We'll plop our vampire there, and it'll have instructions for how he moves and that kind of stuff. So that's the basics of gameplay. Okay, like just from an overarching view, there's going to be an event in the world. You have personal missions as well as side quests that you can accrue that are taking you all across the place of Skyrim, and you're just interacting with things. That's the core game mechanic. You're unraveling the story as you go. Through a series of choose-your-own-adventure type things, this is going to tell you, which card to draw from your numbered deck. There are a mega ton of cards. They have crafted a massively deep story that can fit up to 4 players at a time, I believe, where you just never make the same decisions twice. It's a really deep toolbox to be able to do some storytelling, and they did a great job with it. Now, that being said, let's examine a few of the items. So, let's see, I want a piece of armor. Yeah, it's a weapon. And a shield. Okay, perfect. Again, this is their demo set because of needing it for TTS and that kind of stuff. So it's not the full experience, but if we look here, let's talk about items. First of all, if you want to enchant or upgrade an item, you'll see this little symbol on the bottom right. That means to enchant it, you would need 2 soul gems. To upgrade it, as far as like sharpening it or something like that, crafting would need 2 stone. You accrue those randomly. They're almost given out like rewards, like experience and that kind of stuff. You just accrue them as you play missions. There's nothing really special about how you get soul gems or whatever. But what's cool, and if you'll forgive me for doing this to you, having to move across the screen a bunch, these are your enchantment and or upgrade cards. So if I were to enchant this item, let's say I spend 2 soul gems, I can give it the absorb stamina enchantment. I gain 1 fatigue whenever I hurt somebody. I'm sorry, when receiving any red damage. So basically, the more I get hurt, the more energized I get to do attacks. If I were to upgrade it, then I would put it to the side, and you would see it does +2. So this would give me +2 right here to my yellow shielding. I'll explain what the different, like the red hammer and the yellow thing are in just a second when I move into combat. But these cards are essentially how you're able to upgrade your gear. Every one of these upgrade cards has an enchantment up here and a physical upgrade here. So let's get that off to the side. As far as armor goes, there's not a lot to say. We're going to talk about more about armor in combat. So I'll tell you what, let's just equip his hide armor. Keep that there. Let's move into the weapons. Actually, I'm going to get rid of this card too, just because I don't want to get bogged down with too much info. I really just wanted to show off the fact that you could enchant and craft weapons. So with this, you're looking at this weapon card. As you can see, my guy just has claws right now at the moment. And essentially, when you get into combat, things are a little bit different when you're sneaking, but if you're doing a straightforward combat, you're going to choose what kind of attack you want to do. Different attacks will do different kinds of damage. Damage is yellow for like light damage, red for something really, really heavy, and then there's also, I believe it's either blue or purple for like magical attacks. This matters because certain foes will have resistance to certain kinds of damage, and so sometimes you just need to work as a team to take an enemy down. But for this, you would pick your attack. So let's say we wanted to do a swing, okay? We would grab our 3 skill dice, as well as any that are, if we have 2-handed skills, you can see here, if we have a 2-hand skill, we would grab an extra dice for that. But we're going to grab our 3 basic, because this is how you do a skill check, and roll them. And we're looking for one of those Imperial symbols, the little dragon guy. We didn't get a single one, so we totally missed that. Well, actually, this is a good time to show another mechanic. You can actually spend fatigue to boost it. So now you would roll an extra die. And that was just a copy. Boom, there we go. So basically, when you expend fatigue as your resource, which we should have spent one earlier for our normal attack, now that I think about it. You expend fatigue as your resource, and then you can also keep spending it to keep fishing for more dice. And that's going to matter significantly with some attacks over others. So there is that to look forward to. But now that we got it, we have succeeded, and we would deal the enemy 3 yellow damage. Let's take a look at an enemy here. So I'll show you what I mean. So we have a Bandit Chief, which should be on the the tougher end of things. The Bandit Chief, he has an armor of 4 when it comes to those yellow attacks. So what that means is we're going to take our little... So now that we have an enemy and we have our damage, he starts the game with 4 as his armor rating for yellow. We just did 3 damage. So that's going to bring him down to 1. As you can see, he already starts with 1 resistance to red damage. And so in this way, you and your team can work together. If you had a mage, you could be like, he's weak against magic. He has no saves that are part of the blue or purple, like for magic damage. So he has no resistance to it. So you can just light him up with magic, and all of a sudden, he will start to degrade his health way, way faster. When you kill him, everybody gets 1 experience who was involved in that fight. And then these things are pretty cool. So essentially this is like your loot. The reason there's so many spaces is because the person who delivered the killing blow gets to choose one of these things. They get to keep that item, put it in their inventory, and then the next person in line gets to choose one, and that kind of stuff until all the goods are taken. Obviously, he's not super interesting because all the rewards he gives are 3 gold pieces, but you get the idea. That's how you can have a varied amount of stuff to harvest off of your enemies. And that's pretty much combat. You know, I didn't go over like how to dive into dungeons and that kind of stuff, but realistically, it is skill checks. I have a great steel sword. I spend a fatigue to do an attack. I choose my attack. Roll the 3 dice plus any relevant skills for the skill check. If I get whatever is depicted here, it's successful, and it does that kind of damage to a person. So, you know, as you can see, it's honestly, it's not complicated. It sounds like a lot. It's just skill checks. That's all it is, really, realistically. When you get to the end of dungeons and stuff, it'll tell you if you draw an item from a normal chest or a grand chest, which usually has like super fancy items in it. Likewise, we have stuff like the shield, which of course can be equipped to you. And this just gives you an opportunity, likewise, to block damage and increases your resistance to certain kinds of attack. Again, you can see it does not stop anything magical. So if you wanted to augment your ebony shield to do that, it would be awesome to do. It would probably make it the most valuable piece in all of the game. But yeah, that's basically it for items. The only other thing I wanted to cover is that if an item has a keyword here like sneak, it gives you that skill. So let's see. Let's say I wanted to sneak up on somebody. Well, I don't have the sneak skill. Like I just have speech right now. But because I'm wearing this, it functionally gives me sneak. And so that's important because my boy, the Khajiit, when he can sneak, he gets better at sneaking. Okay, like the second he can start to sneak, he gets really, really good at being sneaky. It kind of doubles down on that. One thing I found really cool was if you have 2 one-handed weapons, there's not really a way to, like, you know, double blade flurry kind of attack, but many weapons will have those kinds of simple keywords. Let me see if I can find one here. Let's say I wanted to double down on the sneak attack damage stuff for my Khajiit. You can see here, if I had him equipped with these weapons, even though, like I said, I can't, you know, do a dual wield flurry, I still actually get the bonuses from any keywords that are on either weapon. So, functionally, my character right now would have Sneak 1 from the Iron Dagger, Sneak 2 from the Elven Dagger, and if we go down to here, Sneak 3 from his equipment, and my special ability is after you have Sneak, you gain an additional Sneak 1. So this guy is doing super max damage when he sneaks up on people. I'm not going to go too much into detail about how to do sneaking and stuff like that, but that is the kind of synergy and keyword stacking that happens in this game. Now, of course, not every item has something like that. You can see the Greatsword doesn't, but typically there's a trade-off between unique skills and abilities and damage. So these swords are not doing nearly as much damage as this guy on the average. Elven Dagger is different. That's a special weapon. It's supposed to be like a quest reward and that kind of stuff. But, you know, you can tell, take a look at the Iron Dagger. It's not great. Even with the double damage, it's like just as okay. Whereas this guy can powerhouse somebody into oblivion. You know, that trade-off of sneakiness and stealth versus, of course, just outright damage dealing or protecting in the case of a shield. Now let's talk about combat, okay? Combat is really interesting in this game. Whenever you encounter one of these symbols, these are all the different locations on the world. Each chapter has one of these cards. Campaign 1, Chapter 1. Whenever you run into we'll say a grotto or something like that, you're going to face 2 beast cards. If you go into a mining camp, you have a beast and a human enemy, so like a bandit or something like that. If you go into one of these, I think it's like one of the monasteries or something like that, you have an undead, like Draugr, or a human enemy, that kind of stuff. So it tells you what cards to flip. So let's do this. Let's say we go into a cave. So we have... our first enemy will be a mud crab, and our second will be a skeever. And so what we're going to do is really just take these guys out. I already showed how combat works in terms of, you know, you pick an attack, you do a skill check, and you see if you can break that opponent's health. Nothing changes. Makes absolute sense. The only thing that I wanted to highlight here when it comes to the combat, though, is you notice in the top left, these creatures have a level. Well, as your characters level up, these will go away. Once somebody is a level higher, when they defeat an enemy, those enemies go away. So, for example, Arkajit in our fictional playthrough is level 1 because he leveled up. He got the speech stat or whatever. Now, the second I defeat these guys, they go away. And so they're out of the deck. There are tons of enemies and stuff like that, and that's how they ramp up difficulty. So at this point, nobody is fighting mud crabs anymore. Instead, we'd be fighting stuff like this guy, the Bandit Guardian, and things like that where it's level 1 until we're level 2 and defeat these guys and so on. But the reason this is important is because if you have one character who in your party, right, let's say there's 4 of you playing, one guy goes out and just absolutely mega wrecks face levels up really fast, that can have a cascading effect where everybody else really struggles with the game because he is removing those weaker enemies that you need for experience as he goes. And so that could be a huge problem. Again, it's a cooperative game, of course. You're all trying to solve the same problem. You're all on the same team, but there can be these competitive elements within them where you have to work together because otherwise one person can landslide and it'll just make the game insanely difficult for other people. Now, essentially the way combat functions is if you sneak up on them, you get to attack. First, to sneak up on them, you would need 4 of these. It's a sense of like how aware are they, right? The mud crabs are not super aware. They're easy to sneak up on, whereas bandits, they have a little bit more attention. And then to see what they do, this is how you generate the AI. We're going to roll this die, get one of these in the set, and he had the double swords, which we just look at his thing. That's a hack. He's going to pick an enemy and do 2 red damage. That's all there is to it. And then it would be our turn again. We attack, he attacks back, and so on. And so this just keeps going until all the enemies are dead in that particular thing, or you've completed the dungeon. Now, one thing to kind of keep in mind when you're looking at this combat area is each of these spaces is sort of like its own room. You're not necessarily fighting all of them at once. There are going to be some times where you do fight multiple enemies at once. But essentially, in between fighting, let's say the Bandit Guardian, let's say we killed her real quick, between this space and this one, everything but our health resets. It's as if you are dungeon diving in Skyrim, and you just take a hot second to pause between rooms to let your magicka and stamina regenerate, which is exactly what you should do. And so it's that way of doing it. Your health, however, does not replenish, and so that does matter. And so in this way, they can have multiple rooms. When you get to the higher levels, there's gonna be several kinds of Draugr, and then like archers, and then there's like dragon priests. They're all in separate rooms, but the gauntlet is just keeping yourself alive between them. Now, I'll admit, when I first started playing this, I was like, oh, wow, this game is way too easy because these 2 dudes are like the weakest thing ever, mud crabs and skeevers. And that was until we went against, it was a Draugr, a restless Draugr, I think it was. And that thing just nearly punked one of our players, and it was fantastic. So we got to see some real combat in action, and I think it was quite a bit of fun. Lastly, I just want to show off a few of the cool story elements. For example, one of them, Under the Weather. This is a card that you can draw here from your event deck and as you're exploring cities and things like that. Woolene Eye receives me at the Dead Man's Drink. Falkreath is where I feel most at home. These college fanatics prefer ice and cold rooms and inedible meat. I'm looking for an enchantment so my house is constantly warm. Can you help me? So this is an opportunity for storytelling. Can you do this enchanting thing? You need 3 of these symbols. And if you want to push it, meaning you roll an extra die, you can sacrifice a soul gem if you want to. Now, let's say you do this. So you would roll your dice. If it's a success, boom, gain 3 experience. If it's a failure, it's too hot, I faint. Woolene Eye wakes me up. You're not built for this glorious warmth. And so you gain a threat and you remove this card. Now, what's cool about this is that after his little, spiel, whether you fail or not, you will add 105, which is this next card here, to the deck. Wooly Nye Muresh, his words play in my head, nothing to worry about. The place should be devoid of any danger. For some reason, I doubt it. So now, if you can clear 2 evil, these are undead, that's the symbol for undead. So the next time you destroy 2 Draugr, and it gives you the location, you'll go over here, and again, this is your... Sorry about that, I got distracted. So yeah, essentially, this is the same thing. There's a success, a failure, and all those kinds of gems in there. And of course, there is more to it. Some of these quests have multiple parts, which make them very fun. The point I'm trying to get at here is between the main quest, which is, I think in this one, just called the tutorial because it's kind of on rails. Between the main quest and all the side quests that you get when you go into cities and things like that, there is no shortage of cool things here. As you can see, there's still a lot of things I have not yet explored about this game, but I just kind of wanted to give you a rough sense. Honestly, when it comes down to it, in the end, all of your information is nice and well organized here. When you level up, you get to basically move the max of any stat up, and you expend these resources. There's a health thing here that stops you from going all the way to dead. It gives you a chance to basically run away or back out of the dungeon if you want to, which only cowards do that. But as you can see, and then you have your backpack where you can just store items as you go. So there's a lot of cool things here, but this is your main command center, and it makes it very easy. Like visually, there's not a lot going on here, which I love. I appreciate because visual clutter is the worst. One last thing I want to end on is the consequences that I was talking about later on. Consequences could be things like removing certain cards from the numbered deck, meaning that certain narrative options have been lost to you because you failed. But also there's this deck called the Blades, which essentially these represent other blades who are scattered across Skyrim that you are in loose contact with that later on will help you during massive narrative events. But one of the many consequences that you can face for failed actions in this game, particularly with the main quest, is that you have to discard these without seeing who they are. So your actions, even though they don't necessarily mean the end game for you, get somebody else killed. And so with that, you would throw that card away. And now they're not available to help you in the end game or late game later on. Now, whenever I review games, I always try to answer 2 fundamental questions. One, was it fun? That's the most important game or question you can answer when it comes to a game. But the second one is, will it get stale? And that's a bit of a harder one. So let's go one at a time. Is it fun? Yes. I had an absolute blast playing it. I learned the game by turn 3, I would say. And we played for about an hour and a half and had just a great time of laughing. Keep in mind, you know, this is a board game. It's not a minis game. You cannot finish this in a day, right? Like, if you want to consider that a gauntlet or what, you do you. But like with the amount of side quests and that kind of stuff that are here, you're not going to finish this game in a day. But you could have a game night once a week with your friends and you come and you do a chapter. Like that's totally doable. And I think that is a super fun, rewarding way to have like reoccurring gameplay nights with it, especially given the price point. It stretches out the value a lot longer. I feel like this game is really built for like ongoing campaigns with friends where, you know, everyone shows up for game night, everyone cracks open a beer and you just kind of hang out and chat. The turns are not complicated at all. And so it's just a fun, rewarding experience. As for getting stale, let's talk about those consequences once more. Choosing one option on the decision oftentimes locks you out of another outcome, which makes perfect sense. It's just a thing that doesn't exist in Bethesda video games, but it is in this version of Skyrim. There are consequences for your actions. If someone chooses an option before you, as some narrative threads kind of interweave, their system is very simple, which is you just pick the next card. So like if it says go for card 145 and somebody already picked that card up, just pick up 146. That's all there is to it. And it'll continue the same narrative vein. Now, as I said before, there are those cards representing the other blades. Keeping them alive is very, very important just because you're going to need them later on in the whole setup thing, but they are a really big consequence within the system. The idea is that you can dramatically affect the end game by goofing up a whole bunch in the beginning. So if you want to just be the murder hobo that you are in the video game version, you can, but there will be consequences for it. What I'm talking about is replayability, right? On the topic of staleness, this idea, like it was reiterated to me multiple times by the people I was talking to, the marketing and the development team, of just, you can play this game 100 times and have a different experience every single time between the different races, the different skills, the different tests that you do, the narrative decisions you make, the consequences of your actions, but also the other blades in your party, not to mention the blades that are kind of like off screen, so to speak, in that deck of cards, whether or not they survive. Like, there's so many moving parts that are individually simple, but when you put them together, you can ensure that you never have the same experience twice. Add to the fact that they already have, I think, 2 expansions in the hopper. I think you can pre-order them through the Gamefound thing. One is like the Dawn Guard expansion where you're hunting vampires and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. I love that kind of stuff because all they have to do at this point is just introduce more cards, which are low-cost ways of adding an immense amount of narrative for games like this. And as far as staleness goes, you know, if you are somebody like me who is a huge Skyrim fan or Elder Scrolls fan, I think one of the most rewarding things is just reading the names of different characters and that kind of stuff, and it's just all these nice little nods and nudges to one of the coolest video games that I've ever played. I love Skyrim so much. And so seeing, you know, like I said before, haggard old warriors in the video game now in their prime, or the last Jarl of Falkreath before his nephew took over, which the nephew's a turd in Skyrim, the video game, but we get to see his uncle, who was still Jarl at the time 25 years earlier. Just seeing the progression of things, feeling like you're part of the world and it's fleshed out and there's reasons to explore and you're rewarded for going out and questing and fighting in dungeons and that kind of stuff. Absolutely love it. Now for some final thoughts on the game from, you know, a price standpoint. I think for the base game, it's roughly $100, so I think it's 91 when you do the conversion from euros to US dollars. I think plus 15 for shipping or something like that. That is a fair amount of cash for a board game. That being said, there is an immense amount of replayability built into the core set, never mind any expansions. The minis can be used in Call to Arms as well as, you know, they work vice versa. You can use your Call to Arms dudes in this kind of a thing. As far as other stuff goes, when you talk about that price point, you know, I don't think it's ridiculous when you talk about the number of future releases and the different ways to tell stories. The price point is really going to matter you and your gaming group. If you love Skyrim and your friends are into gaming, this is a great choice for you. If everybody wants to pitch in $10 and then make it kind of a cheaper thing for the person who wants to own it totally, yeah, go ahead. I mean, I think that's awesome. You know, it's one of those deals where it's not like buying Scrabble. You know what I mean? It's a different kind of board game. It's a very elegant dungeon diving role-playing experience. And so, you know, and you can role-play it because there are lots of choices to be made by your character. So you can do all those kinds of things. Again, the value is up to you. If you're talking about the amount of time that you can play, it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's a deeply replayable game with lots of expansions on the way and new cards and enemies and weapons and all these kinds of things. So like, there's a lot of rewarding things there. But it's one of those deals, like, if you're into it, it's a great value. If you're not into it, it's a lot of money. To be honest, this is the kind of game that I think my wife would love, because it is, like I said, there's not a lot of visual clutter. It's very simple. Things happen in a very particular order. And yet the what's at the forefront of it is choices and consequences, which I absolutely love. So as I said, I have a link to that Gamefound down below. I was not paid to do this at all. They offered to hang out with me and play a game. And so I was like, heck yeah, I want to hang out with people and play games. So if this is a game that sounds interesting to you, go on over and support them. I know I already did because I want to get a game in. And I want to own these miniatures and kind of be able to play in this story setting. So it's up to you. I just thought it was cool and I wanted to talk about it. So thank you all so much for sitting and watching all this video. It's a long one, I know. And I'll be doing lore videos and other stuff like that real soon once my voice gets back to normal. Thank you so much for watching. Happy wargaming.